100 years ago today, bells rang out around the country to commemorate the end of World War I. Fighting had finally ended. The soldiers who had survived the war were coming home. A nation in grief finally had something to celebrate. In this political environment, today's political environment, maybe always, it's important to note that what they were celebrating was a newfound peace at the end of a vicious and bloody war. After 20 million people had died, the news that the killing was over was cause to rejoice. Maybe that seems obvious, but remember that our own president had planned a military parade, a show of force to mark Veterans Day this year on the 100th anniversary of Armistice Day. It was to happen this weekend until the plans were scrapped in the face of political opposition. In fact, here in the United States, Armistice Day isn't much on the radar. We swapped Veterans Day for Armistice Day. And I think we do well to thank veterans for their courage and their dedicated service in a world that is often a scary place, no matter which side of the political spectrum you lean toward. But Veterans Day, if we're not careful, could become a commemoration of the eternal nature of war. We might run the risk of offering veterans discounts on their lunch with one hand and pushing them into war with the other. We might forget that the ultimate goal is peace, never war. So I want to spend a little time this morning diving into the muddiness of all this, the ambiguity, with a couple of military folks as our guides. And I guess I want to ask a couple questions this morning. First, how can a person be pro-soldier and anti-war? And when it comes to our veterans and to warfare, what action do our Unitarian Universalist values call us to? These questions have been deliberated for a long time in our association. A lot of Unitarian Universalist congregations wrestled with those questions in the Vietnam era, and some split over that issue. More recently, a little over 10 years ago, at my first Unitarian Universalist General Assembly, a discussion was held on the floor of the business hall about VUU ministers serving as military chaplains. It was led by a few of my colleagues, a couple of whom were either military or police chaplains. Reverend Cynthia Kane was one of them. Cynthia is a pacifist and a conscientious objector. It's worth saying, by the way, that before World War I, many conscientious objectors went to prison. The pacifist movement in America grew after the horrors of the First World War and led to people like Cynthia being able to either serve in a way that doesn't require them to carry weapons or to avoid service altogether. As for Kane, in addition to being a conscientious objector and a pacifist, she's also a Navy chaplain. She served in Arlington Cemetery. She served in Hawaii, where she and her family celebrated Christmas twice with the Obamas. Pretty plum assignments there. But she also served on the Chemical Biological Incident Response Force in D.C., which was much harder work, grittier work, and at the Joint Detention Center in Guantanamo Bay. Here are a few paragraphs from a Harvard Divinity School publication from 2016. Cynthia Kane is an alumna of Harvard Divinity School and was honored 2 years ago with the Peter Gomes Award for her chaplaincy work. The article reads, Kane bristles at the idea that she's some kind of a mole trying to inject a pacifist virus into the military machine. Kane says, for those of us in the armed forces, questions about life and death are in front and center of our minds and hearts. Her job, she says, is to be other soldiers' companions through that process. She says, I've heard many war stories about service members' experiences in Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, Korea, even World War II. There's a necessity, she says, in being able to share those stories. I'm here learning, serving, and wrestling with tough life and death questions in the same way that the people to whom I minister are. I companion them, and they unknowingly companion me. Kane says that she's encountered no hostility about her beliefs or her liberal religion from service members. Actually, it's been quite the opposite. Her background allows her to companion the growing number of soldiers who identify as nuns, or no religious preference, spiritual but not religious, these folks. That's good news because while she says she looks forward to a long career in the Navy, she also has no intention of watering down who she is and what she stands for. And one conversation with Cynthia will make that very clear. She says, I'm here in the Navy being exactly who I am. I'm a God-loving Unitarian Universalist, a disciplined and logistically minded naval officer, a peace-oriented, conscientious objecting pacifist, and a yoga-practicing, zazen meditating, tree-hugging, Prius-driving spouse and parent. I am, she says, a part of things, and the people I work with are a part of me. In her presentation at the 07 General Assembly, Reverend Kane raised the issue of how we bring together two ideas: Unitarian Universalist respect for life here and now as opposed to the hereafter, and the military's necessity of dealing with death, either one's own death or one's colleagues. One way she balanced all of that was to create what she called the chapulance. Instead of an ambulance, she created the chapulance, a mobile religious vehicle. The details of this story come from the minutes of the General Assembly meeting. She came up with the chapulance while she was serving in Guantanamo. So it had VUU religious language covering the outside of the vehicle. And she would take it to visit soldiers' hangouts like bars and clubs and talk to people there. She said soldiers love the little wallet cards that contain the principles of Unitarian Universalism. We have some of those here, actually. She was told by an officer one day in talking about the role of military chaplain, quote, my job is to get the enemy. Your job is to keep me from liking it. She carries that quote with her now. Kane's perspective is that military chaplaincy means bearing witness to another person's experience. She reported in the Harvard Divinity article that she had encountered no hostility from soldiers about her liberal religious beliefs, but her own Unitarian Universalists have not always been so welcoming. Kane said that she was called a collaborator. She was called chaplain of the Gulag by some UUs because she didn't fit their expectations of attitudes about the military. But at least publicly, she isn't fazed by that resistance. In fact, she says military and religious institutions are similar in that they both bring people to community. She wants to foster the connections. This is a deeply ambiguous place for liberal religious folk. There is this tension between the world we dream about, a world of peace and harmony, the world for which we're working. There's a tension between that world and the world in which we find ourselves. There is a gap. Sometimes we can let that gap be and just love people in the middle of the mess. And sometimes we get doctrinaire and behave as if we think shaming other people will bring about a peaceful paradise more quickly. I think we're called to walk and act and love and live in this ambiguity, to bear witness in this space of tension and longing in which our ideals and our reality don't match. This is the space where creativity can happen, where solutions might arise, and being judgmental closes that space and closes it quickly. So I give thanks for open-hearted people who serve in the military. What a sacrifice they make to leave family and friends at the call of the president, whether they agree with the president or not. It's too easy for me, who haven't served, to sit back and criticize. If you serve or have served, can you raise your hand, please? I won't ask you to stand, but thank you. Friends, in the military, there are hurting people who need ministry that doesn't come from a traditional religious definition of God. Atheists in foxholes are real and need a place to go to talk, need a way to commemorate the big things that are happening to them. Our clergy make great chaplains in those settings because we're very comfortable in interfaith spaces. With no need to convert anyone, we can really make chaplaincy about the individual person. We join our colleagues in other progressive faith traditions like the United Church of Christ, the Reformed Jewish tradition, progressive Muslims, and a lot of others in being well suited for chaplaincy in the police, in the military, and other areas. I want to close with a few paragraphs from William Ray. William Ray's a Canadian war veteran who reflected a few days ago on the 100th anniversary of Armistice Day. He said, "I am a veteran and the son of a veteran of the Second World War. My father came home an empty shell of a man. Everyone who had known him said he was a different person. To this day," he said, "I relive the killing fields of Yugoslavian slaughter in my dreams. The effects of my service caused me years of pain, homelessness, and substance abuse. My son," he said, "is 3 years old. I will use all the strength in me to ensure that he never knows the horror of war. I will do this by explaining its stark reality to him. I will bear witness." And that's where we, the veterans of Canada, are absolutely failing in executing our final duty: to bear witness, to speak with power and conviction against the scourge of war, and to act in our communities and societies to make this a reality. We need, he said, to stand up and share our pain as a warning. He concludes, "I ask you to bear in mind that people who gave their lives did so in the belief that somehow their sacrifice could move humanity forward, would advance causes of peace and universal rights, and move us to a day when we would live together in peaceful community. That, I would submit, is a noble goal, even if you think that we were misled and mistaken in holding it. I propose that all of us live together in peaceful community." And here's what he asks of us. Every time we approach someone with whom we disagree, I ask we treat them with empathy, humanity, and respect, and commit the only true act of remembrance that matters. When we do whatever small thing is in our power to advance the condition of those in our communities and build bridges of understanding and tolerance, we make their sacrifice a little more meaningful. And that's an act of remembrance that each of us can and should do every day. End quote. So, dear friends, let there be peace on earth, as the old song says, and let it begin with us in all of our interactions, small and large. And in that way, let us honor the work of veterans, to love them and companion them and their families, those still among us and those who paid the ultimate price. May it be so. Amen.